Tonight is the first night of Sukkot. And why is this night different than all other nights? Which may seem to be a strange question to ask about Sukkot, but in reality, many of the halachot of the first night of Sukkot we learn from the first night of Pesach. And so why is this night different than all other nights is such an appropriate question, because on the first night of Sukkot, we have an obligation to eat bread in the Sukkah. We learn that from the obligation that we have to eat matzah on the first night of Pesach. For you see, as the rabbis teach us in Sukkah, Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, there's a Gzeirah Shavah, there's an identical language used by the Torah to describe both the first night of Sukkot and the first night of Pesach. Chamisha Asar, Chamisha Asar, both using the phrase of the 15th when talking about the date of the holiday. Therefore, we have to have bread. The amount of bread, just like on Pesach, is supposed to be a kezayit. At least we eat that amount of bread the first night, and we begin the meal just like with Pesach after Tzeta Kochavim, after at least 50 minutes from the sunset, to make sure that it is definitively night. In addition to that, when we have our meal on the first night, we should be extra careful to have kavanah, to have the intent that when we eat this meal, it's not just to enjoy the holiday, but it is to fulfill HaKadosh Baruch Hu's commandment for us to eat in the Sukkah, to remember the Sukkot that God had allowed us to live in within the wilderness. Of course, this obligation of the first night of Sukkot also has implications if, God forbid, it rains on the first night. Because if it does rain, normally we're fully exempted from eating in the Sukkah, but the Rosh and the Ran both teach that nevertheless, on the first night, we would have to eat that kezayit of bread in the Sukkah. In practice, if it were to rain, chas v'shalom, we would wait an hour or two to hope that the rain will stop. And if it does, we then can eat in the Sukkah. But if it doesn't, or if there's a lot of water in the Sukkah and it's still dripping in the Sukkah, what you do is you go out, you say Kiddush, Shechianu on the festival itself, and make a motzi, eat a kazayit of bread, and then finish the meal inside. You don't make a Shechianu on the Leishev B'Sukkah, and you don't even make the bracha of Leishev B'Sukkah because it's still wet outside. Of course, this year it's not going to rain and it's going to be beautiful outside. We'll be able to enjoy the sukkah with all of its glory. And yet we need to make sure that on this first night, we realize that it's special. All the rest of the days of Sukkot, once we get past the first 2 days, we have an option. If we want to fulfill the mitzvah and eat in the sukkah, or if we're going to avoid mizonot and we're going to avoid a motzi. But on the beginning of Sukkot, we have the obligation to make sure we use the sukkah and we fulfill this very special mitzvah, pointing out that this night, tonight, is different than all other nights.